Hi, everyone. On today's podcast, we're going to talk with Jamie and Ryan English about their unexpectedly long but empowering hospital birth, as well as the effects of severe diastasis recti on the labor process. Welcome to the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast. My name is Rebecca Decker, and I'm a nurse with my PhD and the founder of Evidence-Based Birth. Join me each week as we work together to get evidence-based information into the hands of families and professionals around the world. As a reminder, this information is not medical advice. See evbirth.com/disclaimer for more details. Hi, everyone. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Jamie and Ryan English to the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast. Jamie and Ryan are graduates of the Evidence-Based Birth Childbirth class, which they took with EBB instructor Jennifer Anderson. Ryan is a commercial property manager, and Jamie is a photographer. They moved to Sacramento a few years ago from San Diego, California, and at the same time, they found out they were pregnant with their baby girl. Welcome, Jamie and Ryan, to the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast.
Thank you.
Hi, Rebecca.
Happy to be here.
So tell me a little bit about, how you began educating yourself during pregnancy. So Ryan, your sister is a doula. What kind of advice did she give you right off the bat?
She was the one who even kind of guided us toward the hospital that we gave birth at. And she kind of knew, since we had just moved up here, she knew about all the hospitals in the area and kind of what care they offered. And just having a child of her own and going through that experience, she had a lot of answers to some of the initial questions we first had.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I had actually reached out to her knowing that she had given birth herself up in this area and she was a part-time doula. So I had reached out and asked her if there were any hospitals in the area that had midwifery, that went along with the hospital. So I kind of had like both in one place. So I was specifically looking for that. And it worked out really well because we had just moved here, just found out we were pregnant. And she gave us the advice of looking into Sutter Davis. And then we were able to make sure that we got on an insurance plan that we could, then go to Sutter Davis for our prenatal care and to give birth.
Mm-hmm. And how did you find out about the evidence-based birth childbirth class?
That was actually once I was at Sutter Davis, they had started offering these group prenatal appointments that you could kind of opt into instead of individual ones. And so all of the moms who were due in February had that option, and we decided to do it. And it was at those group classes that they would bring in guest speakers. And Jennifer Anderson came in one of those appointments and talked about birthing classes and preparing for birth. And she kind of told us some of the different options we had, as well as talked about the EBB childbirth course, which she was one of the instructors for. And so, after kind of reviewing all our options, that's how we heard about it. And eventually decided to go ahead and sign up with her to do that course.
Yeah, and just to clarify for everyone listening, you were due in February 2020. So group classes and that sort of thing were still normal then.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think they're offering them right now, but hopefully in the future they will, because they were really amazing. And
you liked the prenatal group care?
Oh, yeah. I felt like I just learned so much more than I would have otherwise. And I did end up having to go in for an individual appointment once or twice. And I just found that the individual ones were so much faster. And the attendant or the birth, the doctor or midwife that I'd see, they kind of would ask me more like, do you have questions, or how are you feeling? Is there anything you want to discuss? And sometimes we couldn't always think of everything in the moment. But at the group classes, it was really nice because some of the other moms might bring up topics that I wouldn't have thought to talk about, or I had forgotten in the moment. So I just felt like it was it was a really neat experience to get kind of more knowledge and more learning from others as well. Some of the moms had given birth before, and they brought in guest speakers to talk about different things along our pregnancy journey. So it was really amazing. And I'm actually still in touch with all of the moms. We're in a text message group together, which has been really supportive and really cool as well.
That's really awesome. Ryan, were you able to go to any of the appointments?
Yeah, I went to a handful of them, but some of them would work that I couldn't make it to. But it was cool to know that Jamie got to experience that in a group experience, and just like connecting with so many different people. And we've, I've even gotten connected with some of the husbands in the group, and I think it brought a more kind of long-term positive experience to it with how they've been able to stay connected. And
especially during COVID, since we
yeah,
can't go out and meet and hang out with people and do the walks in the park with moms and stuff like that maybe I had been looking forward to and people normally do. It's been nice to have this like group text message thread going on where we're always updating each other and asking each other questions and still learning from each other along the way with our babies and as they grow and develop. So,
and I think too, being like connected with people who are having babies, like basically at the exact same age as you, is really important because, over time you kind of can forget a lot of those details. People with older kids or even us with people who are like having kids after us, when you're really close in it, you remember a lot more and kind of can share that experience more than when, time is kind of separated those experiences out.
Yeah.
That's true. So you were taking the evidence-based birth childbirth class back when it was still partly online and partly in person before we moved totally online due to the pandemic.
Yeah.
What was your experience like taking the class?
I think we both loved it. I think part of what drew us to it, we'd been kind of talking about, we should do a childbirth class, and a few friends had done different ones and we weren't sure what we wanted to do, but what attracted us to it, for me especially, was kind of the balance of science and research combined with kind of a practical approach to it. And I think for me, it gave me a really good framework to go into labor with, like understanding what each stage looks like and how long each stage might be and what to expect along the way. I think I kind of vaguely knew some of those ideas, but it gave me like a very good frame set to kind of go into it with, like ways I could be supportive, at each step along the way.
Yeah, and I think for me, originally, I didn't know a lot about, the different birthing classes and the different birthing methods. I don't think I even realized there was necessarily a difference. And I had just heard here and there from friends about hypnobirthing. So at first I was kind of like, I think maybe that's something I'm interested in. So when Jennifer came in and talked about all the different options, it was really nice because it kind of clarified for me, there's different methods of giving birth you can try and follow, or there's also childbirth classes where you're really learning about what childbirth is and what the stages are and what your different options are and all of the research and all of the the options and the scenarios of what could happen during childbirth. And so ultimately when I realized that, I decided I wanted to take the EBB class, and Jennifer had recommended reading one of the hypnobirthing books. And so that's what I did. And I'm so happy that I did it that way, because I feel like from reading the hypnobirthing book, I was able to have some of that mindset of like just a very calm and peaceful mindset and an open mindset. But because I had the childbirth class, I was also aware of everything that could go on. And I think for me, the best thing that came of that is that I was open to the different possibilities. So I kind of knew what I hoped for and what I'd like, the best possible outcome, but I was also aware of different things that could happen and how, we could handle that in the moment. And I just feel really grateful because I feel like I was more open and flexible, but also still felt knowledgeable and still had a sense of being in control in some ways of the I want to say control, but in the sense that I was open to it, but I didn't ever feel like anything happened that was out of my hands or that I wasn't, aware of. It didn't feel traumatic to me at all, I think, because I had such a good knowledge base of what could happen.
It's an interesting combination of like feeling in control, which is important, but then also being able to let go.
Yeah.
It's not giving up control, but it's that kind of like you said, opening yourself up to possibilities.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as I was saying that, I'm like, I guess this sounds a little bit contradictory, but it really is both. And I know a lot of people who have experienced a lot of birth trauma, and partly because they got very focused on one way of giving birth. And when it, if it didn't happen, it was a really difficult thing to process. And I just feel really grateful for the mindset that I was able to cultivate through the EBB childbirth class and some of the books that I read. And the other thing about the EBB class that I liked was that it was partially online, because it just felt, it was a busy season for us. It was the holidays leading up to our due date in February. And it was nice to kind of have that mix of some online or some in-person interaction, but also the majority of the class was online. And I will say now, especially because now you guys are fully online, it was enjoyable. Even the online ones, I really felt like we were able to have good conversation and learn a lot and connect well with the other couples that were in the group as well. And Jennifer did a really great job of facilitating those online classes. So
yeah, I think that's one reason it was so easy for us to switch to fully online, is our instructors were already like really comfortable with the online portion of the class. And so it really wasn't that much effort to switch to fully online. But I do think what we'll probably end up doing when things, quote, go back to normal is we'll probably have both options. I think some instructors love the in-person partial option, but I know the totally online has been really important, especially for people who live somewhere where they can't normally access a class.
Yeah.
So,
definitely.
yeah. So take us to the end of your pregnancy. You talked a little bit about your mindset, but what kind of birth were you planning?
I think my ideal was that I would be able to have a non-medicated childbirth. And I really was looking forward to trying the tub. And I thought maybe I'll actually give birth in the tub, but I wasn't sure. I was kind of open to how I felt in the moment. And also hoping that I could even get a room with a tub, because at Sutter Davis, they had only 1 or 2 rooms, I think, that actually had tubs in them. So it was very dependent on how busy, they were when you arrived and you were in labor. And I was hoping that I would labor and, get to somewhere between 4 and maybe around 4 centimeters dilated or so while I was still at home. So we were planning to labor at home for as long as possible, then go into the birthing center and hopefully be ready to be admitted at that point, use the tub, have an unmedicated childbirth.
Yeah. I think another thing that was cool was that it seemed like they were really honoring of someone's birth plan, which we brought one in and shared with them. And there were times even where they kind of like reminded us of what was on the birth plan.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll talk about that more as we talk about the actual birth, but it was definitely surprising to me because there were times where I was open to deviating from the plan and they were like, no, I think you can stick with this. So it was kind of neat that they were respectful of that. And within our moms group, our February moms, there were some moms who just wanted, to maybe have an epidural or kind of go that route. And they were very respectful of that as well. So
awesome. So tell us about your birth. How did it begin?
Well, I woke up and it was, I think, around 6 a.m. and thought that I might be having contractions. I wasn't quite sure because this was my first child, so everything was new. And I had some moments where I thought I was having contractions over, the last few weeks here and there. So I just figured like, okay, it's early. I'll just wait and see if this continues, and I'm not going to wake Ryan up yet. And sure enough, it did continue. And I started probably around 7 a.m. an hour later. I pulled up my contraction app and started timing them. I mean, they were like really consistent. I can't quite remember in the beginning. Maybe they were like 4-ish minutes apart. So not that far apart. And they were probably like not quite a minute, somewhere under there. And so once that had been going for a little while and I actually had it on my app showing that, they were continuing and that they were consistent, and then I woke Ryan up and we labored at home. So how long were we there at home until
like 4 p.m.?
3 or 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my sister came over, who was our doula, maybe around noon or 1 or something, and was kind of helping out. And we were just moving around the house.
Yeah, we did different things. Like for a while, in the beginning, I was just staying on the bed in a side-lying position and just trying to take it easy and rest and drink water and have some snacks here and there. And then as it progressed, the most comfortable thing for me to do was to be on the birthing ball, sitting on it, but next to the bed and kind of leaning over the bed. So I was actually there for a lot of our time at home, I think. And then when Margie came, we did some other stuff. Like we did the rebozo we used it kind of over the door frame where I was holding on to it and getting some tension that way. I think we went for some walks, 1 or 2 walks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we did a few different things, and my contractions were really consistent. They like never went away. They only increased, but for most of the time we were at home, they were within that time frame that everyone tells you about. I'm kind of forgetting what it is right now. I think it's 4 every 2.5 minutes, and they were like 1 minute long. So they weren't really changing a lot in intensity, but they were definitely within the timing that, you're told, like, when they become like this, you're probably moving further along in labor. And so because they were like that for so long, and we were on the phone with Sutter Davis as well, we probably called 3 different times, or 4 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And they were sort of guiding us as far as when to come in. So finally, at the end of that, in the afternoon, they said, like, okay, it's been a long time. They've been really consistent. Why don't you go ahead and come in? And so we got ready to go, and I went to the bathroom one last time, and that's when I lost my mucus plug, which was like a very strange moment for me. Like, it just made it very real, and I suddenly felt kind of frightened. I don't know. It was just so surreal.
Even though you were expecting and you knew you were in labor, it was still kind of like a confirmation that this baby is coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we left, and one other thing, when we left, my sister-in-law, Margie, she had a TENS unit that she had picked up along the way as a doula. And she had asked me like a few months before if I wanted to use it and let me kind of feel it and try it out. And I had said, yeah, like, bring it along, who knows? And so she put the TENS unit on me before I got into the car. And that actually was really helpful, just to I stayed as low as I could so that if I needed to increase the amount of the current, what is it, an electrical current or something, that I could do that as needed. So I tried to keep it like as low as possible for as long as possible. But that was really nice while I was in the car, since I couldn't necessarily get into all of the best positions that felt the best for me, to have that TENS unit and be able to turn that on as contractions came on. It's really interesting how it sort of, I don't know, tricks your brain a little bit to think about that sensation more than the contraction, or at least kind of like brings the sensation of the contraction down a little bit in your mind. So I actually used that for a while, not only on the car ride, but once I was at a unit. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add.
So you arrived at Sutter Davis, and then what happened next?
Yeah, well, walking in, some nurses had just finished their shift and were walking out, and they saw me arrive, and there was almost nobody there, like no other women giving birth. It was very empty at the time I arrived. So these nurses were walking out, and they saw me, and they were so sweet, and they stopped and kind of helped me in. And as we were walking in, I probably had 3 different sets of contractions.
Yeah, we were kind of slowly working our way in.
And we weren't that far from the door, but it took some time because I had to kind of stop and breathe through the contractions. And so they were like, we're so excited for you. Like, this baby is coming. And we got inside the doors, and they asked if I wanted a wheelchair, and I said, sure. So they went and got me a wheelchair, and we got admitted pretty quickly, and they actually brought us straight into a tub room because nobody else was there. So that was really nice. And yeah, I think at that point, I don't know how you felt, Ryan, but I just thought that I was like exactly where I wanted to be. I didn't know how dilated I was, but I thought that I was probably like between 4 and 6. I just thought I had to be.
Yeah, it seemed like it.
Yeah, and I felt like, even the way the nurses were responding and reacting to me, like they kind of thought that I was further along too. So yeah, so we got in and we got our initial, all the straps and monitors on for the initial 20 or 30 minute monitoring. And it was going well. And I feel like it was towards the end of that monitoring that our baby's heart suddenly had a decel. And so that kind of changed a lot of the rest of the labor for us, because the nurse at the time, she had me sit, she kind of went through like their normal procedure. When there's a decel, they bring you back to the bed if you're not already on it, and they have you shift onto your side onto one hip, and then if the heart rate doesn't stabilize, they shift you to your other hip. So she was doing that with me, but when the bed was still, like the back of the bed was still up. So I was kind of in this really strange, crunched, like on my side, but with my half of my body pushed up because the back of the bed was up, kind of in like one of those L shapes. And I just knew immediately that that was like not a good position for me to be in. It just felt wrong. Like it was really did not feel good to me. And I think, I don't know this for a fact, but personally, I feel that Farah, our baby girl's heart decel was longer because of that position at the time. And I think we'll get more into this, but all of it has to do with, I believe, like my diastasis recti and just the way I was carrying Farah. And yeah, and I'm sure obviously she probably was, the cord was getting pinched, but I just could tell it was wrong. And so her heart, she had like a pretty big decel. And at that point, the nurse started calling in the OB and a bunch of other like attendants and nurses, and they came rushing in and they basically said, like, we might be preparing you for an emergency C-section because her heart rate is decelerating. I don't know. Some of this Ryan's going to have to help me with, because I feel like a lot of it, I was sort of in this, because of the hypnobirthing stuff I had been practicing, I was definitely a little bit more inward. And I remember things, but I don't know if I remember.
You were in a zone.
Really what he did. Yeah, I was kind of in a zone. So they said that. And then I don't know what happened next.
I think we were just kind of waiting to see if things normalized again. And in about 30 minutes, they had.
Well, they finally, I should add, they put, like, everyone came rushing in, but then I had kind of asked, but very, like, weakly, because I was so withdrawn. I wasn't super vocal, but I had asked, like, can you put the bed down? Can you put, like, the bed down? And they finally, somebody heard me and they did it, and I was able to lay flat on my side. And I feel like that's when whatever was happening, the cord getting pinched, whatever it was, like, things got straightened out and her heart rate started to stabilize more. But it took a long time for it to come back up, right? Like all the way.
Yeah, like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because that happened, I didn't end up needing a C-section at that point. So there's definitely things at Sutter Davis where I feel like maybe if I had been at a different hospital, they would have just immediately rushed me into the operating room and not given it like just that little bit.
Well, and I think it's a good example, though, too, of the evidence shows that 20 or 30 minute initial monitoring strip, which you know is going to have a lot of false positives like you experienced, is evidence shows it doesn't improve the health of the mother or baby, but it significantly increases your chance of having a cesarean. And in a lot of hospitals like Sutter Davis, they offer a lot of options, but they still cling to this like initial 30-minute monitoring strip, which they do for liability reasons, but really what it does is it just increases your risks.
Yeah, and I do think it is just interesting because I don't think I ever would have like put myself in that position and just stayed there. Like I could just tell it was wrong, like it didn't feel right for my body, and then it wasn't right for my baby. So yeah, I think that was kind of interesting, but I am thankful that, things stabilized. And so, but the reason that changed the rest of my birth is because I had to be on monitoring after that.
Okay. So then you didn't qualify for the intermittent auscultation because they found the abnormals, even though it got normal later.
Well, they let me, they had to, I don't know all the reasons why, but yeah, they kept me on monitoring, but they were able to put me, like they kind of strapped everything up to like a rolling pole so I could still move around. And I actually was still able to go into the tub at some points as well.
Okay.
So because her heart didn't decel after that for a long time, like they said, okay, you're approved to go into the tub. So yeah. So the labor after that, it was just really long. I think start to finish.
Yeah. I don't know if you had gotten checked before that.
Oh yeah.
Monitoring or not, but you were only at like 2 centimeters or 2.5 centimeters.
So yeah, I thought I was like between 4 and 6, but I was not very dilated at all.
Do you feel like this kind of, and Ryan, maybe you're in a better position to know because you weren't like focused so inward, but do you feel like all of this activity and kind of stress maybe might have slowed things down a little bit or drew out the labor, made it longer?
Yeah, I think it could have, because there was just a lot of uncertainty in those first few minutes. And also I think like the original nurse that we had, we could tell that she was like pretty stressed out by the deceleration.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of, fed
Well, I
stress a
think
little
she was
too.
still good. I don't want to say anything. Like, I don't feel like I had any terrible
No.
experiences with any of the staff there. But we did have one other decel later on in my labor, and there was just a definite difference in the way, just the demeanor of one nurse versus the other, which was really interesting to me to see how it felt with one person, how they respond just in their, like, I don't know, in their body language and just their movements, physically even, to that decel and to the stress they felt internally versus, another person. They both did the same procedure that they needed to do, where they brought me to the bed. They had me lay on one side and then the other, but one person just handled it with a different demeanor than the other, and it was like a different experience. And maybe there's more to it as well. Maybe the decel really wasn't as bad, but it definitely felt different the second time. And they I asked her immediately, because I was in the tub when it happened the second time, and she said, okay, like, I need you to get out of the tub right now and go over to the bed and lay down. So the baby's having a heart decel. And I said, okay. And so I immediately got out, followed her over. And on the way there, I asked, can you put the bed down? And she heard me and she said yes. And so like the bed was flat. So I was able to lay flat on one side. And I just think that helped a lot.
Yeah, and I think things were normal in a shorter amount of time, like 15 minutes or something.
Yeah. And again, this will probably come up because I didn't really realize all of this during pregnancy as much, or even during labor, but it wasn't until postpartum recovery. I really think that, I learned I had diastasis recti, and I think that really, looking back, I think that played a big role, because I don't think Farah was in a good position, because I had a really severe diastasis. So it's not, I've talked to a lot of people, like nobody I know has had this to the point that I have. Like a lot of people don't even know they have even a little one, because it heals so quickly after, in the 6 to 8 weeks postpartum. But mine was very wide. And I think because of that, she, at the end of my pregnancy, was really kind of like hanging out over, my belly looked like this huge torpedo. And I just went straight out in front. And she started to kind of pendulate like down a little bit towards the very, very end. I was 10 days late as well. And she ended up being almost 9 pounds, 12 ounces. So there was just all these factors. And I think because she was so far out, I feel like even though she was head down and facing, her face was going in the most ideal direction, I think that she was very
she wasn't putting pressure on your cervix, because she was kind of, because she had so much room in your tummy because your diastasis was letting her have more room there. Yeah.
So I personally think that that's why my labor was so long, and which we'll get to, I pushed for a very long time. And I think it's because I didn't have the same ab strength that, I might have had otherwise if I didn't have the severe diastasis. So I just feel like my body was doing a lot of work trying to get her back into the right place and to get the pressure on my cervix so that she could come.
Yeah. And I feel like in the first, because we probably got checked soon after we got there. And then again, maybe like 5 or 6 hours later. And during all this time, there was kind of the decels and the like chance of a C-section potentially happening. And we saw more of the doctors during that time, but there wasn't much progression, like maybe like a half a centimeter in that time. But then after that, once.
Well, and I think during that, all I was using still was the TENS unit as well.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any other medication. Because I think later at some point when they checked me again and I still hadn't progressed that much, I think at that point I asked, the OB came in and I said, like, can I, again, like I was very withdrawn, so I wasn't as like vocal or as strong, but in whatever way I could, I was trying to ask, like, is there anything I can take? Are there any, like, can I have help with pain? And I think I had somehow expressed that I was like open at that point to an epidural. And the OB said, it probably wouldn't help you because you're not far along enough, and it might lead to other procedures you don't want at this point. And she's like, I think you can do it. Like, I really think you can keep going for longer. And if you're, why don't you just keep trying? You still have the strength. And if you feel like you're struggling in a little bit, then we can talk about some different options for help with the pain. So I was really like thankful for that and impressed with that, because it wasn't an OB even. She was basically reminding me of that, I think, in the moment, and encouraging me. Like, she really was like believed in me and kind of told that to me too. So that was really cool.
So fast forward a little bit there. You got there around 7 o'clock in the evening. When did you start seeing a difference and things start moving?
Well, we got there probably between around 4:30 or 5.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what time.
It was like 11 or 12 after the 2 decels and after like talking with the midwives.
So yeah, second decel, I'd already done the tub at that point.
Yeah.
Talked to the OB and midwives.
And the second decel had happened in the tub, I think, moving around or something. But it was after that you were able to kind of like settle in.
Well, I think that at some point, I still felt like I needed extra help with the contractions and the pain. They were getting stronger. And I asked what my options were, and they said, well, you could try nitrous oxide. And so they said, some women it doesn't really work for and some it does. But I said, okay, like, let's try that. So they brought that in, and it worked for me. And so I was using the nitrous oxide, and I think that's probably when things got better.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, my body just...
You relaxed a little bit more.
And I think, could kind of do what it needed to do maybe more effectively. But that whole time, because it was like middle of the night to morning, and I definitely have foggy memory of all of that because I was on this nitrous oxide. And what's nice about it is that I get to like administer it myself. So I could hold, there's like a tube attached to a breathing apparatus that goes over like your nose and your mouth. And I could hold it up to my face and breathe it in when I wanted it. But if I wanted to stop, I would just take it away from my face. So I would just breathe that in during contractions.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
And then it was pretty much...
I don't think I slept, but I almost felt as if I did because I was in such a relaxed state.
Yeah. And then we're kind of in that, you kind of turned more inward and kind of got in the zone a little bit.
Yeah.
And then basically it was like that for the next 6 to 8 hours.
Uh-huh.
And then...
It was probably 7:30 or 7:45 a.m.
when they checked you again and you were at 10.
Yeah. They said, okay, you're ready to push if you want to push. So it's kind of interesting. They said, like, I was good to go. Do you want to start pushing? And I said, okay. But I don't know. I never really felt that urge to push. And it ended up taking me 4.5 hours.
Yeah.
So they let me go to like the very limit of how long I could go with pushing.
And were you making progress the whole time, or did the baby feel stuck?
That's the reason they did let me. It's because her heart rate was the best it had been during the time that I was pushing. So I think they felt good about that. And I was making progress, I guess, but it just took a long time.
Yeah.
She didn't get stuck.
Tired.
Yeah, I think I was tired. And again, I didn't really have like that ab strength. And then also like we kind of tried different positions. So like the first thing we did was I was sort of squatting, but on the bed, facing the back of the bed. The back of the bed was up and my arms were over the top. But then I was like, my feet were on the bed and I was sort of in a squatting position, or maybe I was kneeling actually. I was on my knees. And for some reason I was losing, I had like bad circulation. My feet were starting to go numb like that. So we switched to side lying and that was going well and I felt really good. But then after so long of that, they just wanted to switch it up and see if other things would help. And I had mentioned in my birth plan wanting to try a birthing stool. So they brought their birthing stool. And I think there are maybe different kinds of stools. And I didn't realize there was this type of stool, which is like kind of a metal frame. And I did not like it at all.
Yeah.
It was just really uncomfortable to me. And it took too much of my arm strength because I kind of had to hold on to it with my arms. So then they switched me to the toilet. That was a little bit better, but I was just so tired. Like I just did not have a lot of strength left in me. And so we went back to side lying, and that's actually where I felt the best and where I could make the most progress.
With like one leg up.
Yeah, so I was on my side with one leg, open and up. And Ryan and Margie, his sister, they each were helping to hold a leg. And then I was also like grabbing onto my legs to kind of get that extra strength or oomph or whatever in there. And then also at some point the nurse said, is it okay if I give you some guidance on how to push? And I had put in my birth plan, like, I don't really want guidance, because I was really hoping that my body would just take over and I'd have the urge to push and I could just kind of surrender to that process. But that just didn't really happen for me, I think, because of like my unique circumstances with my diastasis and being as tired as I was. So the nurse did ask if she could help, and I said yes. And so she kind of gave me some guidance on a style of pushing that did end up working for the rest of the time to help me get Farah out. So it was more of like the, as the contractions come, you breathe in and then hold your breath and really like deep moans and pushing the baby out, bearing down basically. So I didn't really want to do that. I didn't think it was as good for my body, but I just think for whatever reason, that was what either needed to happen or just how it happened in the moment. But it did work. Towards the end, I was just so tired. Like I just didn't, I think I was in it. I don't know, all of the different hormones and just how long it had been and lack of sleep. Like I was just in a different place. And so I was like asking them, like, is she ever coming? Like, I don't think she's coming. Like, she's not coming out. Is she coming out? And so I kept asking that, and everyone encouraged me, like, she's coming, she's getting closer. And like, as she started to crown, like they had a mirror out for me to look at, and they had me feel the top of her head. And I don't think for me personally, those things didn't necessarily give me, like some women talk about how that's like this extra motivation and they're able to kind of do the last push and get the baby out. And that didn't necessarily happen for me that way, but it was interesting being able to see that and see her start to crown and like feel her. And with the last few pushes, the thing that I remember the most is that her head, she had a really big head circumference. Like it was like 99th percentile, I think. Mm-hmm. And one of the nurses said later it was like one of the biggest heads she'd seen. And that huge circumference, like I was pushing, and at that point, I was too tired to keep pushing, and I got stuck with her briefly there. So I had that like a ring of fire sensation for much longer than I thought I was going to have it. I thought it was just sort of this passing thing as you push the baby out, but her head got stuck there. That was the worst part, I think, of the whole process for me.
Yeah, it was like 3 contractions probably.
Yeah, 3 different contractions, but then she came finally. And once her head was out, her body, just like with the next push, just slipped out. Mm-hmm. And that part was really easy. So yeah, that I did not like that. But then it was over. And it's funny now, like talking about it. And I think that this was mentioned in the EBB childbirth class, but when you are unmedicated, your body, releases hormones to help with the pain of what you're going through. And also you get kind of the full effect of the hormones after the birth that are really healing and bonding. And I honestly, I think it's because of the different hormones and things that were happening in my body, but I honestly don't even remember like what the contractions felt like or the pain. And the only pain that I could remember afterwards, in the weeks afterwards, was that ring of fire. But even that's like starting to fade now.
Yeah, that's why we're able to go on and have more children, I guess, as a species, is we have a little bit of amnesia. It's like you can remember there was pain, but you can't recall the exact sensation. Like you can't necessarily feel it in your body again.
It's so crazy that you can't recall it clearly. Like you'd think you'd be able to. But yeah, so that's kind of, I don't know, I think that's kind of cool.
Ryan, what was the process like for you? I know it was a long night in the hospital and a long pushing phase. How were you coping or helping?
I think just in any way that I could. I felt like at some point there wasn't a whole lot that I could do as we got further into labor and then with pushing, but just kind of helping with her position and.
But more because I was like rags. So withdrawn, like I went so inward.
Yeah. And keeping you hydrated.
Like I wasn't super responsive anyway to them if they were like, it was very minimal, like the words that I was saying and how much I was interacting.
Yeah. Ryan, you said you were keeping her hydrated and repositioning her.
Yeah, helping with her position. And we had like cold rags that we were kind of swiping in and out.
Yeah, especially when I was pushing.
Cool. Yeah.
So I was feeling really hot, I think.
Mm-hmm. But I think too, like we could see, being kind of at the opposite side could see the progress of her pushing where Jamie couldn't as much.
Mm-hmm.
She kind of felt like things were happening, but we could see that and knew that she was getting closer. Yeah, I think, the only time that I probably felt like maybe tired or kind of losing energy was in that longer labor section in the night before we started pushing. But once Jamie started pushing, I think I had, there's kind of a rush and
adrenaline or something.
Yeah, and was, feeling good and excited.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's crazy I could tell her head was big. At first, actually, I thought it was small because it was just, the way that kind of her head was being misshaped.
The very back of their head starts to show.
Yeah. But then once she, I realized that wasn't her whole head eventually.
Oh, yeah. The funniest, just to add a fun moment, you'll have to tell her about the cheeks.
Oh, yeah. When she finally did come out, you could see kind of her head coming through and her forehead sliding through and her eyebrows. And then it came past her cheeks and her cheeks just popped out like balloons almost, like escaping.
She was funny. So, she was a larger.
She really was the definition of chubby cheeks, huh?
Yeah. He said they just popped out. Mm-hmm. So funny.
And then I was, obviously really surprised by how big she was because we didn't know how big she was going to be.
We didn't know how big, but
we suspected.
Ryan, so I was only a 6-pound, 5-ounce baby, but Ryan and his 2 sisters were all above 9, right?
Yeah, I was almost 10 and one of my sisters was over 10 pounds.
So we kind of knew maybe there was a possibility. And then we ended up having an ultrasound at 32 weeks, I think, just to check on my placenta because I actually had my cord was kind of closer to the side of my placenta. So I just did an ultrasound to check on that. And at that ultrasound, the tech there told us that she thought we were having a really large baby, that she was going to be really tall and just kind of measuring her bones and different things. So she had said that. And then I had come back to my prenatal care with my midwife and we talked about what they found at the ultrasound and that got brought up. And the midwife was like, well, sometimes with the ultrasounds, there's a wide range of how correct they can be as far as the baby's size. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. So I kind of went on, the last 8 to 10 weeks of my pregnancy thinking well, she could be big, but it sounds like, that's not necessarily true. So I wasn't too worried about it. And it was kind of interesting to now look back and see how they handled that, I guess, the suspected big baby. They did it with a very calm, cool, casual demeanor of, you're going to be just fine. It might not even be right. Don't worry.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was cool because I didn't have a lot of stress about it. So
yeah,
really,
I was going to say, listening to your birth story, the long pushing process, suspected big baby with some problems on the fetal heart rate monitor a couple of times. I can see how in a different hospital you might have had a different outcome.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think so. I definitely, like I said at the beginning, I just felt really supported and really loved throughout the whole process. And yeah, they did their best to respect my wishes and stick to the birth plan if they felt that that I could do it and that it was still healthy for me and for the baby, even, during moments where I was ready to go off of it. And yeah, the prenatal care, it was just really neat. I think they acknowledged different things that might happen, but they also were really good about trying to keep the mothers at a low stress level the entire time. So they're just very supportive and with all of that as well. And I think that was really helpful.
And how did it feel when your daughter was finally born and in your arms and you were both looking at her?
It's surreal. Just seeing how big she was and how cute she was and chubby, it was just really special. I think hard to take it all in those first few minutes.
Yeah, it's so surreal. I think for me it was a huge mixture of relief, just so much relief that it was over,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That portion and pregnancy too, because there were times, I was really sick for the first half of my pregnancy and it just was a long journey for me. And I think kind of finally getting to this point where like she was here and she was in our arms and we could see her and hold her, and she was crying and she was covered in vernix. And it was just like, I don't know. It was a really cool moment and so joyful just getting to hold her. And, you know, obviously we've been talking to her throughout the pregnancy too, but just to have her right there and be like, it's okay, we're here. Like, we love you. Like, you're okay, you're safe. And just getting to like kind of do those first moments of really comforting her outside the womb was so sweet and special. And just taking her in, like really got to soak her in. They had told us shortly before she came that there was a chance that she could have gotten some meconium in her lungs. And so they had said, like, if she cries when she comes out, then we're going to put her on her chest and you'll get bonding time, you'll get that golden hour. But if she doesn't, we might have to take her to, you know, help her breathe and get meconium out. She might have aspirated meconium. And so thankfully she did cry. And so they gave us the golden hour and we got to just hold her close and really soak her in the beginning. And then they did all of like the measurements. They weighed her, measured her head. That's when we found out how big she was.
Yeah.
So that was really, they were really special moments. Definitely. Ryan took a few photos for us to keep and treasure.
Yeah.
It was good.
So thank you so much for sharing your story. I love hearing it. And I wanted to know if there's anything I can help you with, if you have any questions for me.
Yeah. So I did end up postpartum realizing that I had a really severe diastasis recti. I think the normal, they measure it finger width. And it's basically your, you know, now I've learned like your linea alba connective tissue, which holds the two sides of your forefrontal, whatever, the 6-pack abs together. That expands like as you grow during pregnancy. And for most women, like if you were to measure how wide that is, it's maybe 1 finger, maybe 2 fingers after they give birth, and then it heals postpartum. And for me, I think I had like 6-7 fingers width. So it was really severe, very unusual. I feel that if women have it to the point I did, it's usually if they're having multiple babies. So anyways, it took me a while to kind of find the right information. And I had known a little bit about it beforehand, but really not like all of the correct information that I would have liked to have known, as far as kind of, you know, later I learned like correct posture to have the best alignment and breathing through my diaphragm. And all I had really learned beforehand was like kind of a brief, like just don't do sit-ups and, you know, kind of stay away from cat-cow pose. So I think my question is, I know most women don't get it as severely as I do, but I would love to see like a little bit more in-depth information kind of presented to all women, and just in case, you know, there could be more preventative measures. And I guess I'm just wondering like why there's not more of that already, or if it's like a field that's still being, an area that's still, you know, people are learning a lot about still, and like whether it's something maybe even that EBB could dive more in depth into like in the future for women. Yeah. I don't really know what the exact question is, but it kind of revolves around that.
Yes, it's really interesting because in prepping for our talk, we were looking at the research on the diastasis recti, and in talking to some people in Europe, it's really interesting because it's just like standard practice there to assess everybody for diastasis recti and to provide physical therapy or physiotherapy to everybody.
Yeah.
So after birth, just like everybody gets pelvic floor therapy and physical therapy, whereas in the United States, it's like, you have your baby, we check your vagina to make sure your stitches heal if you have any, and that's it. Like, you're done. You know, maybe we assess you for depression now, which is new. But really, diastasis recti affects a lot of people. It personally affected me and still affects me. And what I found is that there's just really a lack of education and knowledge about it in the United States.
Yeah.
And especially in the exercise field. So, you know, I always exercise with my mom. We just do it together, and we'll go work out at places. And whenever we work with a trainer or we're in a class, every single trainer or class teacher I talk to has no idea what I'm talking about. They're like, you have a what? and I'm like, I can't do planks. I can't do crunches. Like, it makes it worse. And then I usually like lay down on the floor and I show them like how you can fit like a whole hand in between my ab muscles. And they're like, oh, I never knew that,
I know.
So I think there definitely needs to be more attention drawn to it. There's not a lot of research on prenatal treatment of diastasis recti. There is a couple of websites that I recommend to people who want to learn more, and you may have some recommendations as well, but there's one called thetummyteam.com. And she has an interesting article on prenatal core weakness and diastasis recti, and she talks about the exact same things you talked about having like a torpedo shaped abdomen, and how when you have a very severe diastasis recti, it says it can lead to a prolonged labor, less effective contractions, difficulties with pushing and that sort of thing. And then there's also one place that I have found has some good free video options as well as paid options is the fit2be.us exercise program. And they also have a YouTube channel, and they have some like introductory videos and a web page about diastasis. And basically they teach people how to exercise in a way that like helps heal your diastasis instead of like making it worse. Because a lot of the exercise, you go back to an exercise class or whatever after you have your baby, and a lot of the things they have you do can actually make it worse. So, but it seems that research supports like basically physiotherapy or physical therapy, which typically starts around 6 to 8 weeks postpartum, is the first step in treating diastasis recti. And we only have one randomized trial on it, and found that going through a deep core stability strengthening program leads to significantly improved with the diastasis recti measurement and significantly higher quality of life. So we do have evidence supporting it. It's just that it seems like a lot of people aren't really aware of the issue or what you need to do about it.
It just feels like the information is there, but you already have to know about it and be motivated enough, like I was experiencing it, to really find it, And I think some of the exercises that can help you with healing after, especially the different breathing exercises and learning how to use your diaphragm, I believe from what I've learned, some of those can be used prenatally, like or while you're pregnant, to strengthen the core, like during your pregnancy, the deep core, like during your pregnancy, and keep your linea alba stronger. And so it's kind of that stuff. I'm like, wow, if I had just been taught like that, like just in general, I think for all women, it could be a good thing to know. And to
it also
learn.
helps, the exercises help with preventing incontinence too. So it's not just, the function of the abs, but it's the whole core. It's all connected. Another great resource is a book by Katie Bowman called Diastasis Recti, The Whole Body Solution to Abdominal Weakness and Separation. Do you have that book?
I have it in my Amazon cart. I'll send you a link to a few of the different online programs I use, which I had found the Fit2be one, and I just haven't tried that one yet, but I have found some other helpful online programs as well, which I could send you the links for.
If you want to send those to us, we'll put them in the show notes. There's also Katie Bowman is a biomechanist. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but she also has a blog at nutritiousmovement.com where you can go to learn more about diastasis recti.
And from what I believe, I haven't read the book yet, but I believe she does talk about, I think it's in the title, like it is a whole body solution. And that's something that I've learned along the way too. So it's not only like learning how to sit and stand and move throughout your day, how to pick your baby up and using the correct deep core muscles, how to breathe, how to use your diaphragm. But it's also, for me and for most women, like, what are you eating, and learning what are foods that are triggering bloating in your system. Because if you're bloating, that's putting pressure against your linea alba, and that's keeping you from being able to strengthen it and allow it to heal. So there's just so many different factors that go into it, especially if you're on the healing side. And just in case anyone's listening and going through this, just to give people hope, I did get to learn about it early on in my postpartum recovery, and I did see a pelvic floor specialist as well to kind of help me in the beginning. And I think I got on the right track, but I think, so I was, like I said, maybe 7 fingers width, and they also measure the depth if you press in to see how strong your connective tissue is. And mine was very weak. I mean, I didn't even press that hard because I got so scared because it felt like I had nothing, no support, like just my insides were just there. And now I think I have maybe a 1.5 or 2 fingers width right at my belly button. And that's pretty much it. So it's taken a lot of like consistent this whole time, pretty much postpartum, probably since around 6 weeks or so, I started doing some very light diastasis specific strengthening exercises. And until now, like I've done those almost every day, and I've worked a lot on my posture, alignment, breathing, and what I've been eating. And I've gotten to this point in my healing where I almost feel like normal most of the time. And I don't have to be constantly thinking about it as much. And a lot of like those habits have become subconscious as far as like how to move, how to breathe. But yeah, I'm not fully healed all the way, but I think technically I might be, because I think they technically say like if you're 2 fingers width or less, you don't have the diagnosis anymore. So that's really cool. And I just wanted to like put that in there as like a little beacon of hope for anyone else going through it.
That is super inspirational to hear that you went from 7 or 8 finger width to 1.5 to 2. That's incredible in 8 months.
Yeah.
So, wow. So Ryan and Jamie, do you have any advice or words of support or wisdom for people who are listening who are planning on entering birth or parenthood soon?
I think just going back to like leading up to the labor and delivery, really just preparing and hoping for the best, but also being open and trusting of the process. You know, ideally, if you're able to choose the location you're giving birth at, you're going to have OBs or midwives and staff that you can trust. And I felt that way. Like I felt very trusting of them because I knew the statistics at the birthing center, and I was really happy with my prenatal care. So that put me in a place of like really being able to just trust them and be open to the process and whatever took place. And I think that was pretty huge. I think it would have been a lot different if I felt more closed off and worried about it and, you know, really clinging to one specific outcome.
Yeah, I think finding ways to educate yourself that you connect with. I think we both kind of tried a few different books and sources, and, you know, some we didn't connect with as much as others, but eventually the hypnobirthing book and the EBB class, we both really liked and felt like we kind of connected with that philosophy. And I think that helps a lot with preparing yourself.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll add, and I know this isn't, like some women, it's not helpful for them to listen to other women's birth stories because maybe it makes them anxious. But for me, I found it was the opposite. Like the more birth stories I could listen to, the more I just found it really fascinating. And I realized how many different ways it could go and how unique each birth story is. And that actually helped my mindset a lot as well, and kind of, you know, educated me as well. And I listened a lot to the birth podcast because I have a ton of different birth stories on there. So
the birth hour podcast?
Birth hour podcast. Yeah. Yep. So, and like what you're doing, you know, just talking to different people about their birth stories. So I loved listening to them. I listened to them almost my entire pregnancy because I just found it really helpful, and it just like made me less scared because I heard of all these different, you know, birth stories, and the women made it through and they healed and they had their babies in their arms, or it was an entirely positive experience for them, even if they didn't experience anything harder or more traumatic. And it was just really hopeful and really cool and fascinating to listen to those. So that helped me a lot too. And I'd recommend that to most people.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie and Ryan, for coming on the podcast.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you.
This podcast episode was brought to you by the Evidence-Based Birth Childbirth class. This is Rebecca speaking. When I walked into the hospital to have my first baby, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Since then, I've met countless parents who felt that they too were unprepared for the birth process and navigating the healthcare system. The next time I had a baby, I learned that in order to have the most empowering birth possible, I needed to learn the evidence on childbirth practices. We are now offering the Evidence-Based Birth Childbirth class totally online. In your class, you will work with an instructor who will skillfully mentor you and your partner in evidence-based care, comfort measures, and advocacy, so that you can both embrace your birth and parenting experiences with courage and confidence. Get empowered with an interactive online childbirth class you and your partner will love. Visit evidencebasedbirth.com/childbirth class to find your class now.